Hello friends and fellows of the internet, it's me Chaz, and welcome back to episode 2 of my video game diary for the month of April 2020. So for those of you who weren't here for the last episode or for some reason forgot, even though you watched the last one, basically my video game diary is a series that I started on this channel where I kind of go through the last month and talk about the games that I beat, rolled credits on. There's some games that don't really have credits in the traditional sense that I'm saying that I beat. Just I'll explain once I get to those games, but again, it's just for the games that I beat / played this month. There are some games that I'm leaving out. I actually have been playing Animal Crossing since March, but I'm actually not going to have that in this video. I'm probably going to have that in next month's video because I haven't rolled credits on it, so I do want to, be fair. But without further ado, I do want to make one small announcement. I know it's dumb to make an announcement in the beginning of a video, but for those of you who are completely unaware, I have a new podcast. Some of you may remember the now under hiatus, currently unnamed podcast. I did that with my friends Nintendo to Blue Kokiri, and it was a lot of fun. And we just kind of had some scheduling issues. There's no like bad blood between any of us, and obviously I'd be happy to start recording that show again. I've been sitting on an idea for a podcast called Comfort Food for a really long time, and basically it's all about games, movies, TV shows, books, whatever that people have fond memories of, that people love, that people are going back to in these trying times and rewatching, because obviously the entire news cycle, whether you watch it on YouTube or on the TV, if you listen to it on the radio or on the internet, you will hear people talking about bad things right now. And I feel like talking about comfort food media and encouraging those conversations where you kind of get to talk about a security blanket for yourself for a little bit, or listen to someone else talk about something that they're passionate about, is super important right now. And I've kind of been sitting on this for a while, but I once this outbreak hit and once this quarantine hit and I saw a lot of people kind of unhappy on social media and just unhappy in general, I thought now would be a better time than ever to get it started. So I actually do have the first 4 episodes up. This video actually did get a little delayed so that I could edit one of the episodes of the podcast. The most recent one is an episode with my friend Song. Some of you may know him from some of the older streams. We talk about Super Mario 64, but the games before that are Splatoon with my friend Flip, Call of Duty Black Ops 2 with my friend HGen, which I'm sure a lot of you guys are excited, would definitely like, because I know you guys like our chemistry, so definitely go check that out. And then the first episode was actually an episode that I recorded with my 2 friends from school, TJ and Isaiah, about Cowboy Bebop. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's get into the games, because there are a lot. There are actually, I think, 2 more than last month, and I have a lot more to say about them. So the first game that I beat this month actually didn't come out this month. It came out this year, but I forget when exactly it came out. But it was kind of lauded as like one of the first must-have Switch games of 2020. It's an eShop game. It's called Kunai. It's actually a Metroidvania kind of. It's a short Metroidvania. It's about like 8 hours long tops. And I basically just blazed through it in a week, but it's a really fun, fluid game, and it's a lot more forgiving in ways that other Metroidvanias aren't, in a not hand-holdy way, if that makes sense. It kind of, because one of my least favorite things about playing Metroidvanias is making progress with a map, dying, and then going back to a save point, which I understand is part of the game, but but what Kunai does is when you die, you go back to your last save point, but it saves the map progress you made and nothing else. So I really do kind of like that it's a little bit more forgiving and a little bit more understanding of what is and isn't satisfying about those games, because like obviously Super Metroid does that, or doesn't do that. It deletes your map progress until up to like where you last saved, and that's my second favorite game of all time. But if it did something like that, if it was a little bit more forgiving in that way, I think I'd probably like it a lot more. Obviously, it's harder at the beginning. That game is harder at the beginning, but back to Kunai. Basically, Kunai is, you play as this really weird humanoid tablet called Tabby. You're like a weird killing machine apparently, and the story's super weird, doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it's fun enough. There's a lot of like funny references, goofy little bits in there that I actually really enjoyed, and just kind of. It's a bit more story focused for a Metroidvania, I would say, considering how much gameplay is actually in there. And it honestly, that's not actually to its detriment, I would say. I actually really, I had fun with the story, I guess. I don't know, I don't want to belabor the point any much more than I already have, but again, this story isn't amazing or anything, but it's serviceable, and there are some funny moments. But what I really loved in Kunai is just the movement. there are very few games that I've played that have his movement that feels as consistently satisfying as kunai, because the main mechanic of the game that you basically start out with from maybe like 10-15 minutes in onward is the mechanic of you have two kunai, hence the name kunai, that you can shoot almost like Spider-Man webs, and you can swing along like whatever room you're in. You can use it to climb walls, you can use it to do basically any kind of traversal you want, and you can even upgrade your kunai to do different things for you. So it's kind of a thing that that you see if you've played a game like Flint Hook, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, where you kind of have these fluid motions that are oddly physics-based considering the kind of game it is. And then also another thing that I actually really liked about the game was its visuals in general. Obviously it has kind of a weird like monochromatic kind of style, but I think it really let some of the art, especially in the cutscenes, really shine. Like there are in certain story beats there will be like little cutscenes where you kind of get to see cool freeze frames, and it looks, I don't really know how to describe it because it looks modern. It's not like an 8-bit, 16-bit game, but it's definitely not like a ridiculously beautiful like Final Fantasy VII Remake looking game. But it's really, really fun. So I definitely recommend checking that out if you're looking for like a good, short, quick Metroidvania with some awesome movement tech. And then one of the games that I mentioned, when I mentioned games that I didn't necessarily beat, but I kind of beat, Round Guard is one of the two games that I had on my mind. For those of you who've never heard of Round Guard, it's kind of like a roguelite meets Peggle meets an RPG. There's a lot going on there. And if you're not aware what Peggle is, Peggle was a game that EA made for the Xbox 360 back when it was a much newer console. And Peggle, it was amazing. I love Peggle. And so I was super, super excited to see Round Guard come to Switch. I picked it up a little bit later than when it actually came out. It came out a couple months ago, and I bought it like either late March or early April. I forget which exactly. But Peggle was amazing. And when I heard the comparisons of Peggle to Round Guard, or of Round Guard to Peggle, I was immediately intrigued because why would you not want to play a game that's like another game that you love? And so I think I went in with expectations that were a little bit too high. I knew what the game looked like, and that was actually one of the major deterrences for me for buying this game. You see, for me personally, I don't really care about graphics, but I do care about visuals. And 16-bit, 8-bit graphics don't bother me, and high fidelity AAA graphics don't bother me. And, there's a lot of room in between. And Round Guard has a very weird, cartoony feeling aesthetic that feels weird. Its art style, I don't know, its art style is just a little off-putting to me, and I know that's a very like subjective personal thing, but it's kind of, I don't know, that was kind of one of the major deterrents for me buying it, because it just looked a little off-putting compared to something that looked so good like Peggle. And so I picked it up, and so far I think I've done 2 or 3 complete runs of the game. And because it's a roguelike, you can really basically do a run in one sitting. It's different every time. So for those of you who are looking for a game that will last you a little longer, it's definitely not the best roguelike. It's not near, I would say, the tier of like Enter the Gungeon, Binding of Isaac, but it's definitely good. And essentially the interesting thing about Round Guard is you have basically 3 roles. So you have your standard RPG roles. You have your rogue, you have your mage, and you have your fighter. And you choose between those 3, and each one has like a special starting ability, and then you can unlock abilities, weapons, armor, and other power-ups throughout your runs. And then some of them you can stack and carry over, which is, again, a thing that I really like about a lot of roguelikes, because, that sense of progression combined with that kind of addictive sense of being able to start a new game whenever you want is super satisfying to me. So that was something that I really liked about Round Guard. I found like it's also a very chill game. And it's also one of those, it's like a great game to play while you're like watching TV or doing whatever, because obviously right now you're not, a super intense engaging experience isn't always what you need, especially if you're playing games all day like I am. But I definitely recommend checking out Round Guard if you're looking for something to just kind of play while you can look at your TV or whatever, because it's also basically a turn-based game. So, and then in that same tier of kind of weird games that don't really have an end per se that I was talking about earlier, the other game is Lumines. So Lumines is a super obscure indie game from the Vita, from what I understand, that got ported to Switch, I think, last year, and people who've played it love it. So it's basically Tetris, but an indie game, and I don't know about y'all, but I love Tetris. Tetris is like... if we're talking core gameplay, Tetris is easily in my top 5. Tetris 99, probably top 5 games on Switch. Or easily top 5 games on Switch. Tetris 99 is, I think, my second or third most played. Or it's my third most played behind Smash and Breath of the Wild. But yeah, so I obviously love, like Tetris, I love that form factor of dropping blocks into a thing with puzzles and ramping up difficulties. And basically what Lumines does is it kind of takes a different approach to similar mechanics to Tetris. So instead of matching up blocks to clear a row of something, you match up colors of blocks to form to form 4 or more of a certain color or something that matches, and then it clears. But the twist is that it's a rhythm game. So it's a super fast-paced, super awesome, like very sonically diverse soundtrack that kind of keeps everything pumping and pulsating. And the HD rumble, I know a lot of people complain about HD rumble, and in handheld it's a little weaker than it normally would be with just a Pro controller, but the HD rumble is super awesome. It kind of just serves as a way to immerse you even further, which I really enjoyed, because there are times, like I tweeted about this the other day, but I basically just said, there was a time in my last Lumines run where I could see the code. I don't know if you guys would know what I'm talking about in that scene from The Matrix where Neo essentially sees the Matrix all around him. And that's what I felt like in this run of this game. And I've had a few experiences like that. And it's so... It felt like Nirvana. Like it felt like a state that I never wanted to leave, but I also never wanted to experience again. Like I felt like my entire psyche was fixated on this one game. I was even listening to a podcast and I was still comprehending it, but I was like so in the zone that I couldn't fail, and I didn't. And I literally got to the end of this like really long challenging mode. I played for an hour straight for one game. It's unbelievable. It's so fun. Highly recommend it for fans of Tetris, for fans of puzzle games, for people who are looking for a really different experience that also has some good music, some rhythm stuff. And yeah, I don't know, I love Lumines. Like I've been playing it nonstop, even after I kind of got to the end of that mode that was kind of the main mode. It does have a few story missions on the side, which honestly I'm not a huge fan of, because they're kind of simple and uninteresting compared to just the endless or marathon or shuffle modes, because I think those are just much more interesting because they're score based rather than just put these blocks here to clear the screen. I don't know. It just wasn't that interesting to me, so I wasn't a huge fan. But yeah, I definitely recommend checking out Lumines. But now, this month, I beat 2 of the biggest games of this generation. The first one being Final Fantasy VII Remake. I'm literally getting chills just mentioning its name. I adored Final Fantasy VII Remake. Honestly, at this point, it's probably my game of the year. For those of you who are unaware, I am not an RPG guy. I like anime, I like that kind of storytelling, but I am not an RPG guy, especially turn-based. I always find myself kind of trailing off in RPGs after about the 10-hour mark, at most. Except for, there are certain exceptions, of course, with something like Pokemon, but Final Fantasy is one of those games where I find myself trailing off. I've actually played about half of the original Final Fantasy VII, and I did like it, and I do plan on going back and beating it, because I actually do remember where I am in the story, which is actually one of the main reasons why I usually don't go back and revisit and finish those RPGs. But Final Fantasy VII Remake did not let that happen. Once it got its grip in me, it did not let go until I rolled those credits, or at least a little bit before I rolled those credits. So, for those of you who aren't aware, Final Fantasy VII Remake is a remake of what most people consider to be one of the greatest JRPGs and probably greatest games of all time. I don't know if I'd go that far personally, but it has such an iconic story, iconic characters, iconic soundtrack, iconic visuals, so many things that serve to be perfect for a remake. And Final Fantasy VII knocks it out of the park. In the same way last month where I was talking about Resident Evil 2, imagine if I liked the original Resident Evil 2 and cared about the original Resident Evil 2. imagine that. Like, my love for this game, I don't understand. I went in extremely excited, starting way back in E3 of this last year, because, like many of you, my first introduction to Cloud, the main character of Final Fantasy VII, and essentially the Final Fantasy series in general, was when he was added to Smash Bros. As a playable character. Now, of course, I was mad back then. I was a hardcore Nintendo fanboy. I was like, why is the representation of Square Enix essentially stabbing Nintendo in the back, the representation that Final Fantasy, an iconic franchise from the Nintendo and Super Nintendo, getting representation in Smash? That was before I understood a lot of things about kind of the gaming landscape, and before I did a lot of growing in my own mindset. But now that I'm kind of lifted of, or relieved of some of those things, I was never really paying attention to the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Like, I knew it was a thing in the back of my head. Like, I remember Etika, may he rest in peace, talking about kind of that remake, talking about how it was episodic, how he was like, I don't know how I feel about this, guys. And at this last E3, when Square Enix just began this entire re-reveal, they showed the gameplay, they showed a cinematic story, they showed all this stuff. And oh my god, it blew my mind. I instantaneously, Final Fantasy VII became one of my most anticipated games for this year. When it got delayed, of course I was a little heartbroken, but it wasn't that long of a delay. So when it came out on April 10th, I was actually ready on April 9th at 11 p.m. with it preloaded onto my PS4 Pro, just ready to beat up some Shinra guards, and that I did. The game took me about 35 hours to beat, I would say. And it covers the original, about the first, like, maybe 5-ish hours of the original Final Fantasy VII, which is not a big chunk of that game, but it blows it up in such a spectacular way. Every character gets some new developments. Some characters who had, like, 2 or 3 lines, or were a throwaway joke reference to Star Wars, all of a sudden have massive backstories, and you care about them and what happens to them, unlike you did in the same way with the original. And the soundtrack is amazing. It's brilliant. It's beautiful. It contains so many homages to the original soundtrack while also doing new things. And it's just, when the soundtrack hits, and then the combat, which I haven't mentioned yet, but it's also probably my favorite action-based combat system in an RPG, just because of how fluid it feels, how different every character feels, and how much you have to switch in between every character, because the ways that certain meters and mechanics work, if you aren't making moves, you're standing still, and you know what happens to a shark that's standing still, it dies. So yes, I just genuinely loved so much about this game. There were a few things, however, that did really disappoint me. There are certain things that they do towards the end where this entire game, they're kind of hinting at this really cool meta-narrative that wasn't necessarily in the original game, that I actually really liked up until the way they changed it and made kind of a... You might have heard this reference before in the keynote, in the discourse about this game, but they made it kind of Kingdom Heartsy, from what I understand. I compared it to Kojima just because that's what I know, because I've never played a Kingdom Hearts game, but there were some things towards the end that I wasn't the biggest fan of, and aside from that, I think the game is awesome. There are definitely, like, a few parts where I was, like, really falling off, but for the most part, every single play session I had probably lasted 2+ hours, because I could not force myself to put the controller down, because the combat was amazing, the music was amazing, the visuals were amazing. This is probably the most beautiful game I've ever played, just visually. But yeah, I don't know, enough of me gushing about what probably is going to be my game of the year. On to the other biggest game of the generation that I rolled credits on this past month. This is probably the biggest game of the generation, like, bar none. It's GTA 5, Grand Theft Auto, obviously a huge series from Rockstar. They put out like one every 5-10 years, and they always sell well. In fact, Grand Theft Auto 5 is the most profitable piece of media of all time. It made more money than Star Wars. It made more, or any single Star Wars movie. Sorry, any single Star Wars movie. Pokemon is still the most profitable IP of all time. But GTA 5 is huge, and for so many reasons it's a cultural phenomenon, but mostly that's because of the online mode, which I actually have not touched. I have exclusively played the story, and I was mostly in love with it. I think GTA 5 stays completely constant, and that constant is a very high standard for a lot of reasons, whether it's the satire and writing, whether it's the characters, whether it's the feeling of just driving really fast down the highway with like Roundabout by Yes playing. It's just such a satisfying feeling. And the approximation of Los Angeles that this game takes place in, called Los Santos, is in a way its own character. It's beautiful, it's hilariously irreverent, it makes fun of Hollywood all the time, and it makes fun of a lot of like the kind of stereotypical things that you see in American culture, which I find hilarious because obviously, like, if it's good, if satire is remotely good, I will love it. And that's one of the things that GTA 5 does best, from the billboards to the radio ads to the characters to some of the things that your character yourself says. It's a constant jab at something wrong or something funny or something that should and could and should be made fun of in our society. And obviously I know I'm sounding a little bit like the Joker meme, we live in a society, but genuinely GTA 5 is such a strong, consistent experience. And all the characters in the story mode are so strong and memorable too. I was just blown away by so much about this game. That being said, it does get old because, again, it kind of doesn't really change. It doesn't necessarily get stagnant per se, but I would say that it's, in its consistency, it can get boring. It can get old. And I think that's where I kind of messed up, because I didn't really do any of the side quests. I didn't really play any of the online modes, but I did go through and I did play with the characters and everything. Play the story mode and experience the story. You know, I was never listening to a podcast during the cutscenes. I was invested in everything. And it was definitely a long game. Like, I started this way back in like February or January, before I even started this series. And I think that's the right way to play it. I think you should be pacing yourself with a game like GTA 5, because if you force yourself to marathon it all, you are going to get very bored. And that's not a jab at the game. I just think that the game itself is super consistent and has a lot of things to do, but the story missions keep you doing those things with enough variety that you kind of get used to the pattern. So definitely recommend it, but also beware of GTA 5's kind of pacing in its story. I'm so happy that I got to play all these awesome games this month and talk to you all about it. So for this month, I would say that my personal ranking for these games... Oh, this is so hard. Fuck. This is really challenging. Mostly Final Fantasy 7 and GTA. That's like the big. Those are the big two that I'm like having trouble like kind of ranking. But I think as of right now, it goes Roundguard, Kunai, Lumines, GTA 5, and Final Fantasy 7. There, I said it. I think GTA 5's a better game, but I enjoyed Final Fantasy 7 more this month. Like, when I first started GTA 5, I enjoyed it a lot more than I did towards the end. Again, the ending's amazing, super satisfying, one of the best endings in a video game, honestly. But if you want to hear me talk more about GTA 5, I actually have an episode of my podcast that I talked about at the beginning of this video coming up very soon. Actually, I think a week or so from the day that I'm putting this out, so I definitely recommend you all go and check it out. But anyways, yeah, the Final Fantasy VII, again, just to circle back to my thoughts on it, I think that it's a much shorter game. There's a lot less things going on in Final Fantasy VII. There's more filler than there is in GTA 5, I would say, and the side quests aren't good. But the moments of triumph, of emotion, of the music swelling in the middle of an awesome boss fight, or the music swelling while you're just climbing a ladder over a beautiful landscape, and just like being able to pan a camera around, when in the original Final Fantasy VII, climbing the ladders was the biggest pain in the ass ever. It took 3 years to climb a ladder, and now it's like one of the coolest things ever. So I don't know, and it's just such a good remake with so much heart, such memorable, awesome characters. So I definitely recommend you check them all out. I don't think there was a game this month that I played that I didn't like. I really hope you all enjoyed this video. Thank you all very much for watching. Did you play any of the games that I beat this month? Did you play any of the games that I beat last month? Let me know down below whether or not you agree with what I said, some of your recommendations for me, some of the things that you thought about what I said, and honestly, what your favorite game of the ones that I gave above is. Also, please, please, please be sure to go check out my podcast, Comfort Food. Links down below in the description to Spotify and Google Podcasts. Please go follow, subscribe, do whatever you can to help me get this podcast big. Please go listen as soon as you possibly can. I really, really appreciate it. You can find me on Twitter at CHAS_MKE. I'm also on Instagram there. You can find Comfort Food's official Twitter account at Comfort_Food_Pod. And that is the official Twitter account for the Comfort Food Podcast, where you can stay up to date, find out about the topics for the episodes, what guests we're going to have on, all that awesome stuff. So definitely recommend checking it all out on there. And again, please subscribe, please like, and please tell me down below what you thought about this video, what you want to see me play next month, all that good stuff. Anyways, be nice to all the essential workers and everyone that you're quarantining with. And please wash your hands and stay inside. Peace out.